And that is coping by ignoring Jews in the shadow of the Holocaust in 52 to 56. The shock of the Holocaust was followed by a period of time when people didn't want to talk about it too much. So even though ordinarily one thinks that the more immediate something happened, the more powerful it is, but you and I know it's actually not true. When something bad happens, anyone who's a physician, anyone who's a psychologist, anyone who's gone through difficult traumatic periods, it takes a while before you can talk about it. Isn't that true? Right? You don't want to talk about it right away, especially something as powerful as the Shoah. First of all, it's so depressing. It just is. And Jews in America, as well as Jews around the world, did not want to hear about it. Our sensibilities have changed in 50, 60 years. And even then, it's actually not so simple. Me, myself, and I can't put real pictures up here for most of you. People can't handle that, usually, or they find it very distasteful, even though they know it happened. And that's an American audience. This is true of audiences around the world. Moreover, when it was so raw and new, and you met people one after another getting off the boat and coming to Baltimore, wherever it is, the people over here, when you actually hear what really happened, and not just in a general way that there was millions of people killed and tortured, when they tell you what individual experiences and the horrors, even Rabbi Herzberg, where I'm the rabbi now, he was very big in helping Holocaust survivors and all that, but I mean, many of them told me himself, Menashe Shamroth, the others, they started telling the Rebbe, he said, this happened, he said, don't give me all the details. You understand? And this is someone who was the opposite of being callous, who devoted a good deal of his life to helping these people. But I know what you went through, I can't stand it. The Ger Rebbe, famous in Israel, where all these guys and their Ger Hasidim get off and they come to Palestine after 45, especially after 48 and 49, and they all go, and you know how if you go to a Rebbe, you spill it all and all the rest. And he said, don't tell me, I want to help you. Let's, talk practical. Let's look to the future. I'm not deprecating what you went through, obviously, or anything like that. I don't know, but don't give me the details. So that's the type of period it was. Second of all, it's a guilty conscience, of course. After all, the Jews in America and in Palestine could have done more. That's the simple fact. And they knew it, and people didn't want to talk about it. That's religious and not religious, the associated, this group, that group. When it's all said and done, you can make all the excuses in the world, but the magnitude of the horror was such that everybody, the emperor has no clothes. Everybody knew that things could have been better, and therefore the victim makes you feel uncomfortable simply because it's your own guilt, but you're projecting, of course, on the other person. Thirdly, the immediate agenda was full. After 1945, as we've seen, and you know anyway, the immediate agenda was to take care of the refugees, the displaced persons, and then wage the struggle for the establishment of the State of Israel. That took up a lot of energy. That's totally understandable. The establishment of the State of Israel, of a Jewish state for the first time in 2,000 years, of course, quote-unquote compensated for the Holocaust in the minds of many people. It's a famous speech of Rabbi Soloveitchik, I'll talk about later, I hope in this semester, where he says in 56 and all the rest of it, that he feels theologically and otherwise, it's weird and it doesn't actually make sense in the logical sense, but nevertheless, it's like you paid the price for the show and then we got the Jewish state. There's a certain nechama or a certain understanding, and I'm not talking about whether this works in a debate class or in a logic class, but people felt that the kishkas, we had a terrible price, but we got something for it. You see? And that sort of palliated it for the immediate time. And finally, after 1948, there was the gigantic struggle that I spoke about last year to a lot of you in this audience, to put Israel on its feet, economically, militarily, and in terms of the mass aliyah. So if you're talking about an era when you had remember the Ma'abarot and the mass refugee camps, and Israel being overwhelmed with just trying to stay afloat, now's not the time to talk about Eichmann, you get it? Now's the time to raise money for the UJA, as they said, to go provide milk, to provide food, and certainly provide for the defense of the country and things like that. And we'll talk about the Shoah later. And then in Israel itself, there was also an unspoken element of a deep shame, of a rape that could not be punished. The Jews, if you have any kind of national thing for Klal Yisrael in any sense, they did all this to us and they got away with it, and a third of our people were killed and tortured in all these ways, and it's the feeling of having been violated, which as a nation we were. And this is something that's very hard to deal with, as you know. Think of these how does in Israel they talk about the new Jew, the modern state of Israel, the fact we have Tzahal and all the rest, but we all know what happened 5 minutes ago. And same thing for American Jews. And so it's just no one should, chas v'shalom, ever have to go any kind of situation where they're attacked or violent, raped or anything like this, obviously. But you understand that the victim has a certain reluctance to revisit that sort of thing. You understand? And this was very much in the conscience and the consciousness of so many Jews around the world. The shame and rage was exacerbated, actually, in Israel by the carefully cultivated muscular Zionistic image of the fighting Jew and the new Jew, which was so much at the heart of contemporary Israeli culture, especially in those years. The Israeli army defeated the Arabs. They're creating, as they say, the new Jew. We'll see later, there's a whole discourse in secular Zionism that we have no shaykhus, a connection with the Jewish past, and there's the Golah Jew and all that kind of stuff, and that's the new thing over here. And who are they fooling? 5 minutes ago, the Jews were herded in the cattle cars and things like that. These notions had gone back to the first chalutzim of the separate, the fighting, the proud Jew. You can't beat me up. You punch me, I punch you back. But they'd been given a shock by the Holocaust when so many Jews went, as the expression was constantly put in Israeli literature, katzon l'tevach yuval, like the lambs to the slaughter. And what is there about us that why didn't we all go fighting at least? And and fight back over there. Why didn't they fight? Now it's not really right, anything I'm saying, I'm talking about what happened historically. And I'm telling you this is the basic features of the Israeli culture, which is that they're knocking the survivors, because why are you a bunch of losers? And why didn't you fight back? And why did so many people in your families all get hurt without resisting? And that kind of thing. Many children, this is sad, who are from the Holocaust, DPs, who come to Israel after 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, all those years, are verbally abused by fellow kids in schools and even teachers, and things the opposite of what should have been done. Instead of trying to give as much nechama and help them out as much as they could, this was not the attitude that one found on the kibbutzim, and on day-to-day life in reality, and in schools, as I say, and it was really rough. Hence, Israel and world Jewry gets fixated on the kind of Jewish experience in the Shoah that they would like to see, that you see over here. Next one. Yeah, here's a Hollywood recreation of the Warsaw Ghetto. Oh, that you have a lot of writing about in Israel. See, they have a lot of writing about in American Jewish literature also, because that's the heroic Jew. Now, this is not to knock the Warsaw Ghetto, and this is the kind of images that they want to see. This is all a dramatization, right? But you want to see Jews killing Germans, right? Jews dying heroically, taking them down with us. And of course, the Warsaw Ghetto did happen, obviously, and there were other similar uprisings here and there, not many, in Kovno and a few other places like that. But you and I know this is radically the exception. And does this mean that anybody that wasn't involved in this is a coward? You know, that's the meaning of the kind of rhetoric that was spouted across America and very heavily in Israel and in other Jewish communities around the world. If you want to talk about the Shoah, you say Hitler killed 6 million, but there was the famous Warsaw Ghetto, or there were these heroes that fought, and they are heroes. That's not the point. The point is, what do you say about the others that are not involved in that sort of thing? A kind of active Israeli dissociation from the cowardly behavior of the Jews of the Shoah took place. And yet, Israel is a place not simply in 1948 and 49 and 50 of cultural slogans and images. Like that. It's actually real people. And here comes something I'm going to be speaking about at some length tonight, and that has to do with the following. Many Jews fought in the Warsaw Ghetto. Well, not many, some did. Many Jews were what we call died al Kiddush Hashem. No question about that. Many Jews did bad things in the Holocaust. True or not? It's a wound you don't want to look at. Who killed your mother? Not always the Germans. Sometimes the Jewish police working for the Judenrat and things like that. It's messy. And there he is, and there she is. You know, they're right in our shul, or on the street, walking down the street in Tel Aviv or Yerushalayim. You walk in the movie. It's happened over and over again in the early years of Israel. You walk in the movie theater, or you go in the supermarket, or whatever it is. He killed my mother. He put my sister on the train. He whacked my thing. This guy beat me up. Is a Jew. Capo. Very sad. All kind of people. One of the big ministers in the government, Yitzhak Greenbaum, very anti-religious guy from the General Zionists, one of the big Zionist leaders. He had a son that didn't make Aliyah, ended up in Auschwitz, was a very vicious capo, Then later on ended up in Israel. What do you do with him? And the result was that a lot of people in Israel, citizens, feel very strong about this. Like, how can a person how can he be in the movies over here? And how can this guy walk up the street? It's a Jewish state. There was some punishment for what they did. But you have a country of laws or you don't have a country of laws. There's no law in the books that says you can't be a capo. I mean, I know it sounds funny what I'm saying, but think about it. There are lawyers here that will understand what I'm saying. If something's not in the statute books, what do you do to the guy or to the lady? And so there's a move in Israel in 49 and 50 to pass laws, those who helped the Nazis, to punish those who helped the Nazis, violation of laws against the Jewish people. And ironically, this is not so much against Eichmann and people like that, although they're of course covered under this. It's against people walking around in the streets of Israel and elsewhere. Now, if they're elsewhere, there's literally nothing you can do about it. What happens, I'm sure this happened in Baltimore, I don't know the details, but it's happened everywhere. And I've read about it in newspaper accounts and whatever. And Reverend Stern told me there was a case like that in Vishnitz, in the 50s he read about. You see a guy over there, the person might actually, believe it or not, come back to Yiddishkeit. And it's also to a certain degree, al tadin chavera ashatagim mekamo. You don't know what it was like being submitted to that kind of torture, and how badly or well you react under pressure. Not everyone's a hero. And what indeed do you do? This happened often when you see somebody, like I say, sitting next to you in the synagogue or on the subway train or somewhere else, and he said, "This guy did this and this to me." What do you do about it? It's not a simple matter at all. Would you agree? And sometimes you have real horror stories. These are from the old Israeli newspapers, where the guy says to somebody who had been a kid, like a late teenager in Auschwitz, something like that, he says, "You drove my mother to the gas chamber." He said, "Yes, I did. I drove my own mother to the gas chamber too." You see? He said, "I did terrible things." I can only say it was 1943. I have nothing to say. So what do you do about this? Well, the Israel of that time, as I say, they actually passed laws about this, which is something we'll come to very shortly. There's nothing unique over here in what I'm talking about. The reason I have Mitterrand over here was he's the president of France, and he had a socialist party, and he's a big deal, a member of the left. And for the democratic and pro-Semitic as opposed to anti-Semitic left, yeah, sure. But when he was young, they found out after he was president that he was part of the Vichy administration, helping to transport Jews to Drancy and take them off to Auschwitz and places like that. But you don't want to talk about this in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. The whole Europe is a conspiracy of silence. If you really want to know what people did in Belgium, in Holland, certainly in Germany, obviously, but in Italy, and one country after another. And what did you do in the war, Daddy or Mom? I'll tell you what, I was a hero. Yeah, right. Well, I'm just saying, is a culture, a post-war culture of lying, of reinventing the past, of refashioning memory, because the actual truth was not very nice. And I share this with you because, as I say before, this is the shadow of the Holocaust that we're talking about. It was over, but it left a lot of junk besides. And in Israel, this is exacerbated or aggravated by Ben-Gurion's attitude, very famously in general, even without the Holocaust, who always advanced a very selective view of Jewish history, which skipped over the Shoah. It also skipped over 2,000 years. A big point of Ben-Gurion, and remember, he's the founder of Israel, he's the major cultural influence in all this, is Jewish history goes like this. There was the patriarchs, then we have Eretz Yisrael once or twice, then we lost it, we were away for 5 minutes and we're back. What happened? No, I mean it. And what happened during those 5 minutes? Who cares? What happens in Ashkenaz and Sfard in medieval Spain and this and that and the other in Germany? Who cares? You know, no, it's part of the junk of the past. We were away for a couple of minutes and now we're back. And I understand why somebody like him would want to talk that way. I mean, I do get it, but it deprecates and it devaluates the sufferings of people if they're still there and they still have any kind of memory. And by the way, he had relatives there where he made a speech. He said, I have a niece and a husband and several children that were burned by the Germans and all that. And he went right after the war was over to the DP camps. I mean, he understood what's going on, but he's trying unsuccessfully to create a new type of Judaism, a new type of Jew, new type of Jewish identity to displace the old. And we're not talking about the year 2013 when this is already bankrupt and out the window. The 2013, 1 million people will show up at Avad Yosef's funeral in 5 minutes' notice. This we're talking about Israel in 1950 when things were very different, and they really are trying to construct a new Jewish identity across the board. And yet, the Holocaust was really Israel's most powerful international weapon. I didn't bring the book with me, but in Abba Eben's memoirs, he talks about the fact that in 52, when Truman and Atchison were still in office, and Atchison was the Secretary of State, very cold guy, very absolutely logical. You can't even tell by looking at the face. And no sympathy for Jews whatsoever, okay? Not if it's to the detriment of the United States. And he went to Atchison and he said, we want you to help us with Germany. They should give money for the reparations payments. And he said, well, that's not an interest in America. We're trying to build up Germany and so on and so forth. And I didn't bring the book, but he says, the Abba Eben says, I started describing what they did in Auschwitz and in Treblinka and all this. And Atchison said, yeah, I know, and this and this and this. And after 5 minutes, Atchison broke down. You can't believe it. And he says, all right, I hear the point. I'll get you the money. See? So what about the new Jew? What about the fact that we're not relying upon the sufferings of the past? Baloney, you know. When, at the end of the day, Israel's most powerful weapon for many years, and even today to some degree, is the Holocaust. To a large degree, Israel got its legitimacy thanks to the displaced persons. And even Truman said, and I showed you last year, he said, I still get nightmares when I think about these people. That's why I helped Israel. So it's a funny relationship to this past that on the one hand you have to grasp, and on the other hand you're trying to deny. And this is what we call conflictedness, and that I leave to the Sigmund Freuds out there. But the last piece of the pie in 1952 was precisely the fact that this country, Germany, which did so many bad things to Israel, instead of being nuked or put into cherem, Israel had to kiss up to them to get the money. Right? A lot of Jews didn't like it, but the country went along with them. Ben-Gurion said, we don't have the luxury of turning our backs in Germany. They're going to be part of the new Europe and the new world. It's a major force in the economy. And we're broke. We're beyond broke. We need money to bring in the refugees. We need money to build houses and to set up the new Israel. We don't have the luxury. And so what a bitter irony of history it is that the modern proud state of Israel has to come like this, hand in hand, asking money Germany, which they've now stopped until today. And Germany give them the money. So it's kind of funny, you know, you killed my mother, you murdered my father, you did this, that, and the other. Can I have 10 cents? Right? Buddy, can you spare a dime? And Adauer, made things worse by saying yes. So then you got to, show a certain respect for them. And once again, that cannot help but aggravate the conflictedness that they'll feel towards the whole subject of the show and all the rest of it. Israel had its hands full in those years, as you see. There's no effort to hunt any kind of Nazi war criminals. That comes much later. There's no effort to find Eichmann or anything like that. In America, they're still in the period where there are no kinos in shul for the Shoah. This is a change that's happened in my lifetime. And there's still places that don't. But I'm just saying there wasn't even a push. Not that I remember growing up. Tisha B'Av is about Tisha B'Av. The show is a separate thing. Mostly, the people want to speak about it, or the Yiddish-speaking groups of immigrants want to talk about it, and they are not in the necessary socioeconomic level to have any clout, with the Associated. And even then, they don't want to talk about it much. Frankly, they want to. The healthy ones want to go and build families, right? The healthiest approach to dealing with the Holocaust was they got it past you and not talk about it. And how many people grew up not wanting to talk about it even to their own children? Although sometimes the reason you don't want to talk about your own children is maybe you were a capo. You don't want to talk about it. Or things like that. The old Yiddishists, believe it or not, in America, this is disgusting. They're still holding by Stalinism and Trotskyism. Here's Irving Howe, the most famous Jewish socialist writer. He doesn't acknowledge the Holocaust for another 30 years. In the 1940s, even during the war, these guys, these Verbrennte communists and left-wing socialists, they don't care about the fact. It's amazing. You read the writings. They don't even talk about the Holocaust. They're talking about Stalin and socialism and this kind of Trotskyism and that sort of thing. They're out to lunch. It's pretty shocking. And sometimes focusing too much on the Shoah is bad for your health. Everybody knows Rabbi Weissman got a heart attack when he wrote the Mina Meitzah after the war. You understand? reliving the memories and rewriting his experience that he went through the Shoah, it gave him a heart attack. It was so depressing, which is totally understandable. And then comes an event in the history of Israel which shatters the culture of silence about the war in the period I'm talking about, between 52 and 56, and which catapulted discussion about the Jews' role in the war, particularly Jewish controversial roles in the war, to the center of public discourse in the state of Israel. And I'm referring, of course, to the famous Kastner affair of 1952 to 55. Okay, 52 to 55. This involved the story of Hungarian Jewry during the Holocaust. Hungary, as I've described in other places, had a peculiar history during the Second World War. Let me just say that the Shoah is not an undifferentiated story. It depends where and when you were in Second World War. I've said on a number of occasions, many don't know this, if you were in Romania, and you were in the right place in Romania, in central Romania, there was no Holocaust. I mean, it was bad, but they never took the Jews off elsewhere. They never took them to Auschwitz. Not because the government was a tzaddikim, but just never happened for a variety of reasons. On the other hand, if you were a few miles over in a place called Satmar, which is, part of Hungary, but they stuck a finger into Romania and gave the territory to Hungary, then all of a sudden there's a full Holocaust in 1944. And if you're in Poland, that's really the wrong place to be. And so the story we're dealing with is one particular aspect of the Holocaust. That became the controversy. And let me try to explain. Here's a map of Europe. In 1939, just at the time it began, look how big Hitler was at that time. He had taken over Czechoslovakia and Austria, correct? This is before the Second World War. Remember the Anschluss in 1938 and the seizure of the Sudetenland and Czechoslovakia. Germany's very big. Now look over here. Here's Hungary, here's Romania. Look how Hungary used to be this big, much bigger. It used to be all Slovakia, whole big area, 800,000 Jews, but they lost most of this territory after the First World War. However, wait a minute, let's go back for a second. Let's see, yeah. Hungary is small, but Hungary allied itself with Germany. And it wasn't a Nazi government exactly, but it was a pro-fascist type situation. Traditional conservatives, as we'll see, and for their own political reasons, they allied themselves with Germany. So in other words, they declared war on Russia, on America, on England, together with Germany during the Second World War, and were rewarded by Hitler by getting some extra karka. Let's see the next one. If you can see, Hitler gave him a finger, like you see, like that, into Romania, as they said before. Isn't that weird? If you lived in here in Romania, or here, you survived the Second World War. If you had the misfortune to live in that finger, you got killed. That's Satmar, that's Kloisenberg, that's Marmaros, that's all the from area. Okay? And so it's a very weird story. The chief of the ruler of Hungary, the official ruler, what they call the regent, was Admiral Horthy, who was a very old-fashioned conservative, but he wasn't interested in killing 6 million Jews at all. He was, just what you call a very right-wing conservative type of ruler, Hungary, very anti-communist, all the rest of it. These things combined to make a reality, without skipping all the details, that until 1944, I repeat, until 1944, so 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, Hungary was a relative oasis of safety in Europe. Isn't that funny? North of Hungary, they're killing millions of Jews in Poland and places like that. That's where they're running the concentration camp and exterminating everybody. At the same time, if you were a rare Polish Jew and you were able to get into the Hungarian border, in those years that I'm talking about, there was no safety. Of course, they had the Nuremberg laws, and a Jew can't sit on the park bench, and he can't have an employee in this way and the other. But we're talking about the Second World War. The only thing that matters, are they going to kill you or not? If they're not going to kill you, call that an oasis of safety. Hungarian Jewish activists, I'm sure you know, for example, I'll show you later, the Emabanim Smecha, the Rabbi Teichtal, he was in Slovakia, and where they were killing the Jews, he ran away to Hungary. He was safe for a year or two, you see? I had my own, I'm named after somebody, an Uncle David, who, in Second World, he was in Slovakia, my mother's brother, and then, he was able to survive for a couple of years by running away to Hungary, and then things happened, and by the time it was over, he got killed. But for a couple of years, in Budapest and places like that, if you keep your profile down, and you don't walk around too much in the street in the daytime so the police can ask for your passport, or if you have a successful a false passport, if you're able to bribe somebody, you can live a life now, can kill you. Shuls operated, yeshivas operated. You understand? It was a Jewish life. Now, during this time, when Hungary was better off than elsewhere, Hungarian Jewish activists tried to provide at least a little bit of help for the Jews in Poland and Slovakia. So what that means is that there were some Jews who said, I'm not going to worry only about myself, because here in Hungary it's okay, but what can we do to help other Jews? These would include Zionists, non-Zionists, Haredim, the Mizrahi, all different elements. But there were a few Yechidim from each of these groups that said, what can we do? We can't do much, but we can save a few. We can try to get people smuggled over the border, right? You can try to play a little bit mishmash with the passports. Maybe you can bribe somebody or whatever. You have a friend in the Ministry of the Interior to look the other way. And they did help some people to do what I just told you. It's a very complicated story, but I'm giving you the simple part of it. Until March of 1942, you hear what I'm saying? From 39, 40, mainly 41 and 42, until March of 1942, all the killing took place in Poland and the East, as they called it. The German army, if you recall, took over Poland and they invaded Russia. And so what that means is they took over White Russia, Belarus, and the Ukraine, and Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. That's where the German army was directly there. And there, I recall the very depressing statistic that they shot 1.5 million Jews. No, this is before concentration camps were invented. This is where the gas chambers were even started. Just good old-fashioned shooting. They shot 1.5 million people in 6 months, from June to December or so, something like that, in 41. So they weren't shooting people in Czechoslovakia, they weren't shooting people in Germany and Austria, they weren't shooting people in Hungary and Romania and places like that. It depends where and when you are. In March of 42, then you have the Wannsee Conference that was in January of 42. So in March of 42, they want to extend it beyond Poland and the East. And what about all these other countries that make up a lot of Europe? The Germans come to Slovakia, that was the first country. Can we go back to the map for a second? Yeah, go to the next map, the previous map. That's right. See, Slovakia was a separate little country. So in other words, they killed everybody, or they were in the process of killing everybody here by shooting and things like this. Now they're going to set up concentration camps, better yet, extermination camps, all throughout Poland. And they're going to carry out, and they do, as we know, the mass extermination of Polish Jews, 3.5 million of them, in 42, the great majority. But on the other hand, now we can extend it, says Himmler and Heydrich and Eichmann, all these murderers. And the first country goes to Slovakia, which was a small state, as you can see, and allied to Hitler, and was run by a Catholic priest. He was the president over there, Father Tiso. And the Germans come to Slovakia, and they deport 2/3 of the Slovakian Jews, 55,000, something like that, to death camps in Poland, almost all of whom were killed. I had a lot of relatives that were killed in that way, 2/3. The last third was not killed. And why? 2 reasons. Believe it or not, the Catholic Church protested. We always have this image, I mean, I know it's a little shocking to people, but the Pope was not as silent as people make him out to be, Pope Pius XII. I know all the politics are going on in that, but then people don't really have the full picture. When the Catholic Church found out that they're actually taking him to kill him, which the Germans said they're taking him to the labor camps, then you see the president of Slovakia was a Catholic priest. And so this is the old days, not like today where they don't listen to the Pope. And therefore he got orders. He says, you shouldn't do this is bad. And the government already was not interested in carrying this out. And second of all, Jewish activism, because the Slovakian Jews, seeing that they're being killed altogether, for a change, came to Achdus. And so groups that never talked to each other formed together what they call the working group. And so, like I say, the from, the non-from, the communists, the socialists, the opposite, Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, everybody together came under the leadership of this lady, Gizzy Fleischman, who was a, well, you can see over here, she was the daughter of a sheikh, and I don't think she was from, but very traditional. You know, in Slovakia, you don't have Reform Judaism or anything like that. Very traditionalist, and her kids had made Aliyah already, and she could have gone and she stayed behind to work for Hatzalah. And she teamed up with Rabbi Weissmandel from the Aguda and other people from the Socialists and other people from the assimilated Jews, all the rest of it. What can we do in a practical way to deal with this kind of a group? And the end of the story, Rabbi Weissmandel, being a traditional Jew, so I guess bribe him. And, well, that's in the Gemara. Yeah. Look, we can smile and smirk all you want. How have Jews survived as a helpless minority, as the Talmud tells us, as a sheep among 70 wolves for 2,000 years? It's not through altruism. I mean, that's the way it is. I don't want to be over cynical. How does Israel survive today? I'll stop right there. Now, and so they get to Eichmann's number 2 guy, Vislitzeni, and to Father Tiso, believe it or not, and they bribed him. And as a result, it wasn't even that much money. It was $50,000. So not that much money. And as a result, the last third of Slovakian Jewry is not killed. Slovakia is a relatively safe place for Jews for the next 2 years, from October of 42 to September of 44. So, in other words, from April to October, something like that, of 42, I don't want to bore you with the details, that's when they transport 56,000 Slovakian Jews and kill them, and then it stops. And it stopped for 2 years. And only because they paid the guy off, and he says, I'm in a position to mess up the train schedule, do whatever I want, and he did it. Not only that, look, that's how my mother, that's how I'm here. My mother was from the other third. She had sisters and others that were in the first 2/3 that got killed. And she was from the third and didn't get killed. Not only that, but Vislitzeni, this, as you see, a Nazi guy, even says like this: for $200,000, I could stop the whole Shoah. Hear that? I'm in the position to do it, or maybe it was $220,000, and give me a down payment of 10%, and you'll see it happen. I can stop them sending trains from France and Belgium and Germany and Poland. It was incredible. And of course, they wanted to do it, and the money, they couldn't get the money. The World Jewish Organization wouldn't give it, and in Hungary they couldn't raise the money, and it did not happen. They called the Europa Plan. While this was happening, another group of activists formed in Budapest, in Hungary. What I just described to you took place in Bratislava in Slovakia. But one country over is Hungary, and they're a similar type of situation, although the Jews in Hungary, as I just described you, in the years I'm talking about, didn't face any kind of extermination threat, but they came together to try to work on Hatzalah issues, to try to get the Polish Jews in Hungary. And as I told you before, that's how Rabbi Teichtal from the Name of Smecha fame was able to survive and write his book. His community, he was from Slovakia, Peszczany. His community was all killed because they were from the 2/3 of Slovakian Jewry. He hid. They didn't catch him, and he runs away one country over into Hungary. He's alive for another year or two, and during that time he writes his famous book, the Ema Banim Smecha. So you see, your fate depended on where you were and when you were in the years 1940-45. These activists that I'm describing operate on a different plane. They're in contact with outside groups from Switzerland and Palestine and Turkey and America to, they're getting cables from all over the world. As you see, in Slovakia, they said, just give us $200,000. And it wasn't a Frum operation itself. Rabbi Leisman was only one member of a group that was very widely dispersed. Gizzy Fleischman, I told you before, who was a real heroine. The Germans eventually killed her. She was a big macher in the, the Joint Distribution Committee and the WIZO and all this kind of sort of things. And it didn't happen. The name of the group of activists in Budapest was called the Vad Ezra Vatzalah. Obviously, this is not identical with the Vad Vatzalah in America. The Vad Ezra Vatzalah, and one of its most important members was a young lawyer from Kloisenberg, and his name was Rudolph Kastner. Okay? He's going to be the big controversial guy. He is, as I said before, from Kloisenberg. Kloisenberg, if you followed the maps I showed you before, I noticed a little bit confusing, was in Romania. Well, let's start again. Hungary, Romania, Hungary. Get it? It used to be part of the old kingdom of Hungary in Franz Josef's time. And then, which is why the Kloisenberger Jews are Hungarians. And then, as a result of the First World War, it was given over with all the rest of Transylvania to be Romanian. Next thing, they found themselves a part of Romania. And then Hitler gave that finger of territory I showed you before to Hungary, and that included Kloisenberg, or Cluj, as they call it in Hungarian, or Kolishvar, whatever. And yeah, Kolishvar. And the Romanians called Cluj. The point is that it's a well-known Jewish community. His father was learned in the Pressburg Yeshiva, was a frum guy. The mother wasn't so frum. Therefore, when he's growing up, she wouldn't say, I don't want it to be like my husband at Botland, so I want to send you to a good school. And he goes to a gymnasium, and Kloisenberg has a very secular type education, as he doesn't grow up so frum, obviously. And on the other hand, he becomes a lawyer and an activist in Jewish causes, and a very capable type of guy. And he gets involved in some of these smuggling immigrants to Palestine, whatever. You don't have to go into all that. But as I just pointed out to you, then Hitler gives that territory to Hungary. So all of a sudden, he said, why am I hanging around Klausenburg? The main action is in Budapest. And so he relocates to Budapest, and he spoke 9 languages, as these Jews have to do in Central Europe. And so it was no problem for him. And here you have a young, ambitious guy who is having a law practice in Budapest. Is also getting involved in Jewish activities. And if it's the years I'm talking about, if it's the 40s, it's going to be Zionist activities and Hatzalah type of activities along the lines that I just said before. What does this mean? You meet with government officials, you bribe them, you find people's weaknesses, you go in contact with people on the outside. He got involved in shady dealings with the Germans. This is before the Germans come to Hungary. It's the whole question, was he a spy for them? I saw some Israeli professor now wrote something that he gave spy information to the Germans before it all happened. Was information providing one of the costs of doing business with the Germans? Was he crossing a line? Is such a question relevant in the moral chaos of the times? If you're talking about 1942, 1943, you're trying to get some Jews out of one place into another, and you can do it by giving them some information you come across. Is that the right thing to do, the wrong thing to do? Fortunately, we have the luxury here in Baltimore of just thinking about this in abstract terms. Then comes March of 1944, okay? And all of a sudden, for a variety of reasons, Hungary says we want to switch sides, and Hitler invades and occupies Hungary. Once Hitler occupies Hungary, then it's curtains for the Jews. Because in the Holocaust, where the German army was directly, it was bad news. Where the German army was not there, you could deal, bribe, you could do things like that. But where the German was directly, he was there. As soon as the German army occupies Hungary in March of 44, Eichmann shows up with his whole staff. Eichmann, of course, the guy who's going to implement the final solution. They apply the old model of exterminating entire communities, which we know what they are. You get the ghettos, you get the Jewish councils, the Judenrats, register all the Jews, get them to the trains, send the trains off to Poland. Over. Unfortunately, Eichmann was quite efficient in implementing this plan, and in May, Shavuos of 44, trains with Jews started rolling to Auschwitz. Within a few months, nearly 500,000 were sent to Auschwitz. It's a terrible efficiency. This is particularly sad when you consider it was late in the war, right? Eichmann, well, I'll talk about it in a second. Eichmann could not have done this if the Jews themselves had not cooperated. Now, it's 1944. As you see, it's late in the day. If all the Jews say, we're not going to register, we're not going to do this, we're going to run away, all the rest of it, it just simply would have been very difficult. A lot of people would have got caught by the Germans, a lot not. It just would have been, how shall I put it, physically very difficult to get a hold of all those people and get them to where you want them to go, which is what the Holocaust is all about. You've got to organize it in such a way that you get all the people where you want them, and you get them on the trains to how you want to do it, and you get them over here. Otherwise, the system doesn't work efficiently. It kind of breaks down. And the whole point of the Holocaust was to kill them all. It's important to keep in mind, it was right in the middle of this. I just told you, in May of 44 begins the deportations. You know enough history to know that right in the middle of this come 2 giant blows on Hitler. On June 6th of 44, D-Day, the Allies landed in France. Okay, Eisenhower's armies. And June 26th, a few weeks later, the Russians launched their D-Day. People don't know about it so much, Operation Bagration, where they kicked the Germans out of Russia and conquered half of, they busted the Germans bad, and bring the Russians close to Germany. So my point is, Eichmann is doing all this, and he's getting away with it at a time when it's becoming increasingly clear to everybody that Germany is going to lose the war. I mean, here's at the beginning of it, and by the time it's over, look at the Eastern Front. I mean, they lost all this stuff into Romania, and this is only 1st September. They got even farther over here. The Russians ripped them over here. This whole thing was part of Germany, and now Eisenhower has this, as you know, and pretty soon the Americans took over the rest of France in July and August of 44. My point is, just as Germany is starting to collapse or contract seriously, it doesn't stop Eichmann and his guys from implementing day after day more trains, take more people from different towns because they're all registered, and they're all in the ghettos, and they're all, separated, and they're ready to go, and all that sort of thing. I repeat, Germany is losing the war. Hitler is in denial about this, but Himmler is not. Okay? Himmler was the head of the SS and one running all the terror stuff, and he's well known that he saw that Germany's losing the war, but he was in his own state of denial, or fantasy. Himmler, I'm talking about now. Think about what I'm about to tell you. Himmler figures, well, the Allies hate Hitler, and so they'll never make peace with him. But if I take over, that's something totally different, and they'll let me be in charge, okay? So he somehow imagined he was popular in the West more than Hitler, okay? Out to La La Land. Well, I'm telling you this for a reason. If this is the state of mind of Himmler and the guys under him, if you're talking about making a peace, have to do something about the Jews. You see? If you're talking about making peace, might have to stop the killing, that sort of thing. Maybe we can use the Jewish thing as a leveraging type of strategy, help us end the war, cut a peace with the Allies. He really thought this would happen. His plan was make a deal with England and France, and then Germany can concentrate all its efforts on the Russians, because after all, make a deal with America and England, and then take off against the Russians. But the Americans and the English don't want the Russians to take over Europe. Okay? So whether or not he was crazy is not the issue. If you're Jewish, these ideas affect or can affect your fate. That's where I'm going with all this. And so Himmler is willing, under the right circumstances, to cut a deal even with world Jewry, which to him is a real entity, and the Allied leaders that they control. Of course, everybody knows Roosevelt and Churchill are totally tools of world Jewry. This is part of the ani mams of Nazism, right? That the Jews control the world, and they do a very effective job through it. Because if you're Hitler or Himmler, why would the Americans and the British be fighting us? We're fighting the communists for them. They should pat us on the back. It can only be the malevolent Jewish influence, and you just look at Roosevelt, you can tell he's Jewish, and all this kind. No, I'm serious. You know this. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. And again, the point is not whether it's real or makes sense. The point is, if my mother's fate depends on people who think like this, I have to take this into account in how I operate. I've done all this to set the background. Although Himmler, it is in this context that Kastner, the Zionist leader, as I mentioned before, and his group of activists meet with Eichmann, who of course works for Himmler, and his staff, and especially with Eichmann's number 2 or 3 guy, Kurt Becher. You see it in the Nazi uniform, okay? And he cuts a deal, Kastner does, with Eichmann to get a trainload of Jews, about 1,650 people or so, out to Switzerland. This famous Kastner train, where he says like this: the Germans show, we'll give you a little sweetener, and if you give us $2,000 a person, or maybe $1,000 a person, you can get people on this train. And this should show world Jewry what is possible out there if the right deal is made. Okay? Maybe there'll be more trains like this, maybe there won't. And in exchange for this, you'll cooperate with us. And, when you sup with the devil, as the expression goes, use a long spoon. They don't use a long spoon. And the result is that he gets his family out, which you can't exactly blame him. He gets big Zionist leaders out. He gets some youth leaders out, his relatives, and they don't have money for $1,000 a person, so he opens up for rich people. They'll pay $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 a person. That'll cover the expenses of the other guys. One of them, of course, the Satmar Chassidim find about this, and so they'll pay whatever it takes to get the Rebbe out. And so the Satmar Rebbe, ironically, gets out on a Zionist train, and that's how he survives. Well, that's fair. This is well known. And there's some glitches along the way, but they get to Switzerland in the end. They stop for a while in the concentration camp, but by the end it does work. And that's, by the way, that is how the Satmarov survived the war. You understand? It's beyond ironic, but nevertheless it's there. And by the way, they didn't do it for altruistic reasons. They did it because he paid the money. Now, Kastner hopes it'll be the first of other trains. He would go down as the greatest hero in Jewish history if he got 100 trains, like that. So does Eichmann, but Eichmann wants it for his own reasons, as is revealed in the Joel Brand episode, because right after that he meets this guy who's a member of that Vadat Sola committee with Kastner, and he says, I'm going to let you go to Turkey, contact England and World Jewry, and tell them blood for trucks. No, you don't have to give us cash, we need transport, so give us thousands of trucks from American production, British production. I promise we'll only use it on the Russian front. And in return, we'll give you, what do you want, 50,000 Jews, 500,000 Jews? The numbers are not a problem. I can do it. And he could. This is sad, and this is Eichmann, and the total amorality of it is not for discussion. We know who we're dealing with. But the possibility of saving at least 500,000 or 1 million people is out there, and yet look at the way they're doing it. It's very crass. You really think you're going to split up the Allies? Right? That America's going to give them trucks to go use against the Russian army in 1944? You honestly think that's going to happen? Brand flies to Turkey. The Jewish agency is afraid of what he'll do. They tell the British arrest him. He never gets to see anybody. He's interrogated in Cairo. He's a broken-hearted person because this never happened. Comes a key element in the charge that the British and the others want the Jews to get killed. There's a little bit of truth in that because the British minister in Cairo says, "What am I going to do with 1 million Jews? Where am I going to put them? You don't want to put them in Palestine." For which remark, by the way, that gets out in the paper, he is assassinated 2 months later, Lord Moyne, by the Stern Gang. So it really gets, the pot is bubbling. Afraid that any screw-up might ruin prospects for future trade deals with Eichmann, Kastner tries to bury the report of Rudolph Verba describing what is happening in Auschwitz, even though tens of thousands are being shipped there every day. Here comes I told you, you get involved with the devil and you get dirty. And so he's trying to kiss up to Eichmann, and you understand this is a strange story. They're shipping off people all the time, and this guy is, so to speak, doesn't have to wear a yellow star. He can move around and go wherever he wants, because after all, he represents world Jewry and the possibility of possibly making some deal. The Germans figure one day if they want to, they can kill him anytime they want anyway. And so he's running around and conducting these sort of semi-negotiations. And meanwhile, a number of Jews, 2 Jews escaped from Auschwitz, and they made it to Hungary. One of them, Rudolph Verba. My mother met them. And Dr. Verba, and he says, you know what's going on over there? They're gas chambers. They're massacring people every day. What you and I know now, which is not a secret, at that time wasn't so well known. And Verba actually gets his report to Horthy, the head of the government, and that has some consequences. I don't want to go into the whole story. It'll take me too far a tangent. But Kastner said, I guess, don't tell everybody. Just freak them out. And it'll just panic in the communities, and it'll depress everybody if they know the trains are going there. And they say, but people should know where they're going. He says, I'm working to stop that. Don't tell them about anything. It becomes a very morally gray area type. Are you cooperating with Hitler? Is that what you're doing? If the Jews knew what was in store for them, many would not go willingly. That's for sure. I repeat what I told you before. The extermination of the Jews of Hungary, the 500,000 or so get killed, couldn't have happened if they didn't cooperate, any more than is the case in Poland and these other places. Like I say, it's not the point, obviously, it goes without saying, it's not the point to cast blame of people who are stuck in the middle of hell, but, if everybody runs away and fights and this and that and the other, what we know now is it would have been less people killed. Okay, I know it's easy to say, but nevertheless, it's not non-true. This would have upset Eichmann's efficiency timetable. It might get him mad. He might not offer these type of deals or any other deals. The bottom line is, Kastner found himself playing God. Right? That's what it goes down to. Remember, his family was safely on the train. After the war, Kastner makes Aliyah. He goes to Israel. He joins the Mapai party, Ben-Gurion's party. And he rises. He's almost elected to the Knesset in 1951. He was 1 seat away. They got like 45, 46, and he was like 47 on the list. So he was a macher over there. He is by no means the only survivor who acted in an ambiguous manner under the strain of the Shoah. I told you about that before. Okay? Do you know what, let's put it this way. Do you know what your relatives who survived the war, do you know what they actually did during the war? Maybe you don't. You see what I'm saying? Was everything they did 100% kosher? These are not comfortable questions to ask. By 1952, Kastner is a mid-level official in the government, meaning being a member of the party. I told you last year that Mapai ruled Israel for a long time, and it was Tammany Hall. If you're in the party, you get a job. You're not in the party, get out of here. He was the spokesman, the press spokesman for the Ministry of Trade and Industry under Dov Yosef. Remember him last year? The guy who ran the what do you call it? Rationing program and all the rest of it. So he's a dover, he's his official spokesman. It's a job. Now we're dealing, this week is a government furlough and shutdown. A job with the government is a job with the government. And Israel's the same thing. Give you health insurance, gives you all the benefits and all the rest of it. And he's a G12, a G13. He's pretty good up on the food chain. So things are going pretty good. And then in August of 1952, just when our story begins, a cranky old Hungarian Jew living in Jerusalem, his name was Malkiel Grunwald, accuses Kastner of being basically a war criminal and an accomplice of the Nazis. Right? There's Malkiel Grunwald. You see, he's an old guy with a black yarmulke and all the rest of it. He was a strange bird. He was from Hungary, from Sopron. He ended up in Vienna. His kids ended up not being so from. He was a big Mizrahi macher over there, and eventually gets to Palestine in 1938. His son fought for the Irgun and was killed in the Sahel during the 48 war, and his daughter, that kind of thing. And him and his wife end up having a little 10-room, shall we call it a hotel, or what's the right word? Pension or something like that, in Kikar Tzion. You all know what it is. He's a Yerushalayim type Jew, and he's the type of guy you don't want to sit next to in Shul. I'll tell you why, or maybe you do. I don't know you. He says Grunwald was, as I say, an Orthodox Jew from Hungary and Vienna. He was very definitely a grumpy old man with a Stencil's news sheet, which he self-published. So he himself wrote up his own little newspaper every week, and stenciled it and made 200 copies, in which he vented and damned people and things that were banned in Israel in his opinion. So basically he says, this week Ben-Gurion government has done this and it's outrage, and Rabbi Oberstein has done that thing over there, and this guy has done this thing over here, and this, and this government official is stealing of this thing, and the Aguda stinks, the Mizrahi stinks. I'm serious, it's all venting, particularly corruption with the corrupt Mapai establishment. Oh boy, they're running the country and they're doing such terrible things, a lot of which is true. And as they say before, his son had died in the battle for Jerusalem in the Sahel. He's one of those Irgun guys that joined the Israeli army. What can I say? There are Grunwalds everywhere in every shul. Kastner, so this, on one time, in one of these stencils, that he sent in a couple hundred copies. I mean, you understand what a guy writes, he stencils it, puts the stamp, buys the stamps, and sends it off to a reading list of people like journalists and others that he thinks are machers. It's only in Israel. And this week, first, like I say, he dumped on Ben-Gurion, and then another times on Sharet, and then some other guy over here in the government over here. This week he picked Kastner. And he said that, as I said before, the guy's a accomplice of Hitler, and he caused the death of the Jews in Hungary by cooperating with Eichmann, and he knew the truth and wouldn't tell anybody, and so on and so forth. Now, Kastner was no dummy. He wanted to ignore the whole thing. After all, it wasn't even in the real press. True? He had a good job and position, and he didn't need to deal with the accusations from the 72-year-old crank. The trouble is, for him, that the accusations that the Mapai had high-ranking members who were Nazi collaborators who had financially benefited from the Holocaust. He said, whatever happened to the money of the Hungarian Jews, Kastner has it in a bank somewhere, which he shared with his Nazi buddies. This was too good of a story to remain below the radar screen. The story was picked up by, does anybody remember this from old days? Ha'olam Hazeh, you all remember? From Uri Avneri. This was a left-wing thing. This guy was the arch enemy of all religion and all Zionism in Israel. And back in the early 50s, there was a widely read sensationalist weekly published by Uri Avneri. As I said, was a German Jew came to Israel. He was in the Israeli army, and afterwards he as we'll see later on, these are the guys who are so against. This is the ones who want Israeliness and not Judaism. That's the real story. You know what I'm saying? They want Israel to completely shed all Jewish connections whatsoever. It should just be Jews, but it should have no Judaism, Jewish culture at all. And therefore, let's put it this way: he loathed the Mapai. The Mapai loathes the Olam Hazeh. Many years, Ben-Gurion and the others, they put bombs in their offices and they do all kind of dirty tricks to try to close the place down, which of course made them read by more people, as you know. And over the course of 1953, I said this thing happened in late 52. In the course of 53, he had the misfortune to run across a Yeka, the Attorney General of Israel. Was Chaim Cohn, who was originally from this is a real problem. He's from a Orthodox Jewish family that they made Aliyah, and then he shed this. He eventually became a Supreme Court judge and married a Grusha. He was a Cohen. He made all kind of famous Israeli court cases, and he had all the stiffness of looking at it, like a mathematician. And he says, how is it possible that a high-ranking government official can, with impunity, be accused of these sorts of morally outrageous things? We must respond, and sue this for libel. And Kastner is saying, let it go, and no, we can't do it. And by the time it's over, this guy pushes, and he says, we got to take it to court. Big mistake. Any lawyers in the audience, they'll tell you right now, don't do libel cases most of the time. Is that correct? Very hard to do a libel. Why is it very hard to win a libel case? No. Why is it very hard to win a libel case? They put you on the stand too. Right? You accusing this guy of libel, I get to put you on the stand. Get to ask the question. Teddy Roosevelt once made the mistake, after he was in office, of suing a small town newspaper in upstate New York to call him a drunk. He was so outraged, he sued him. He went to that little court in upstate New York, and sure enough, that little schnook got a lawyer, and he asked Teddy Roosevelt, so how many drinks do you have for dinner? And how many you have for lunch? By the time it was over, it wasn't, who's the one who got the egg on the face? He said, I have 2 drinks before this, and a drink, 3 drinks, and any more, I don't want to talk about. Why don't you want to talk about it? You got to watch out when you do a libel case, okay? So that's what happens over here. To the government's surprise and horror, the libel suit against Grunwald, which should have been an open shut thing, turns out to be a very long one. It runs from January to October of 1954. Okay? It became the OJ case of Israel. The judge issued the verdict only in June of 55. Okay? That's a very long trial indeed. The verdict ran 250 pages. So in other words, what they thought would be a little thing, didn't. Okay? And Grunwald was broke. As they say, he was a grumpy old man. But he had the advantage of being regarded as a hero and a martyr and useful by the Jabotinsky types that were in Israel. Okay? If you're in the Begin groups or even the other groups on the right that hate Begin, they had all kind of right-wing groups in Israel, right-wing parties, as I'll explain in a minute. The whole course of Zionism was wrong because Jabotinsky should have been the one on top, and he would have done the right thing in the Holocaust. Instead, these evil guys at Ben-Gurion and Sharet and others took over, and they mislaid everything. And even today, they don't acknowledge that the Irgun was real heroes of the foundation of Israel. And all that stuff was in full hatred form in the early 50s over here. The Jabotinsky movement had split into 2. One part was the Cherut, led by Menachem Begin, who in 1951, suffered extreme humiliation in the elections and had gone into deep depression. I don't know if you Begin suffered from depression at the end of his life. To be perfectly honest, when he left office, he was in depression until the end of his life. For the last 10 years. He stayed in pajamas all day long in his apartment. What do you call it? You understand? For 10 years. I mean it. So his party went from 14 seats to 8. So that's a half. So it was a big humiliation, and should they throw him out? Should they not throw him? It was really bad news. And as I can say, he just went in depression and stopped attending the Knesset, and he was out of it. A whole group had broken away, and regarding Begin not as a worthy leader, among other reasons. He was regarded as too religious, even though he wasn't religious, but by their standards, he's too religious. Because if you identify with Jewish tradition, if you feel that Shomer Shabbos is not a negative trait, that was considered extreme left, because Jabotinsky himself was atheist. This betrayed the explicitly atheist Masorah of Jabotinsky. These guys wanted a Canaanite state, I promise you, radically divorced from traditional Judaism. Remember I showed these guys before, this guy you probably never heard of. There was a whole movement of right-wingers in Israel in the 48, 49, 50, in the early 50s, where they say, we want to have a state in which Israeliness has a total divorce from anything Jewish. We want to have a state of, go back to ancient Canaanites, right? And have no religion or pagan religion, and somehow or other in their fantasy they imagine this will make them peace with the Arabs, or maybe they'll conquer the Arabs and have a huge empire from Egypt to Iraq. Like I say, we Jews do not lack our share of screwballs, and the result was that you had, and these are writers and active type of people in the culture and so on and so forth. I mean, today it's a joke, but it wasn't at that time. But they all hate Mapai. Okay? This is the group that ran the Olam Hazeh newspaper. They see this trial as a chance to bust them up high, expose the sleaze and corruption that it embodies. And it happens at the time the Prime Minister of Israel was not Ben-Gurion. He went in retirement for a year. It was Moshe Sharet, who was basically in personality very much of a loser, a very OCD type of person. And this group gets, so this right-wing group says like this: this from guy, Grunwald, is not even the case. We'll give you a lawyer, the best lawyer, and we're just going to use this to bust the corruption that he has pointed to. And so you're not even going to make a case. It won't even matter who you are. And they get a talented young lawyer, Shmuel Tamir, Shmuel Katz-Nelson, 31 years old, to represent the defendant for free. And he's going to make his name in this trial. And what he says from day one is, he said, what's your defense? The judge says, you want to say that the guy's a crank, he's 17 years old, he's out of it. No, we stand with everything he said. Our defense is going to be that there's no libel. Everything he said about this guy is true. He is a monster, he is Hitler's best friend, he did all these sorts of things. And the judge said, really? You know? And as often happens in libel cases, the accuser becomes the accused. Almost from day one. The accuser becomes the accused. Kastner claimed he had saved a trainload full of Jews. He said, I saved 1,600 people from the show. What did you do? And he had tried his best with Eichmann and company to prevent whatever he could, that he had buddied up with Kurt Becher, meaning he made his business to buddy up with this Nazi official, as a result of which massacres at the very end of the war were prevented. This seems to be true. At the very, very end of the war, they were planning in a lot of concentration to just shoot everybody, and he drove around with this guy Becher, and he said, don't do that, the war is over, and all the rest of it. Again, my father was in Dachau, they had a death march, and I don't know if it's connected with this. Actually, it's not, but he told me at the very, very end of the war, like a day before the Americans showed up, they marched whoever was arriving to a valley, and they surrounded the place with machine guns. They were going to kill everybody. I'm going by what my father told me. And he said, at the last minute, Rundstedt, the famous German field marshal, showed up. He said, forget it, guys, it's over. Just don't do this. So they didn't kill everybody. But those are the type of situations that popped up at the end of the war. And he says, I stopped a bunch of those. That he, Kastner, had gone once or twice to Switzerland during the war to negotiate one of those Eichmann deals of cash for Jews, and voluntarily gone back to Hungary. So he says, look, I'm honest, because if I want to save myself, I was in Switzerland already, I wouldn't have to come back, I would have been safe from the Germans, and I went back and put my head in the lion's jaw in order to save more Jews. So I'm a hero in tragic times. A hero in tragic times. Tamir, the lawyer, concentrated on proving a number of damning facts. Kastner had suppressed the diffusion of the Verber report, leaving masses of Hungarian Jews unaware of the fate that awaited them when the trains reached their destinations. Did you know about what was happening? Yes. Why did you tell the people? Well, for this reason, that reason, I don't want to get them on. Isn't it true that if the people would have known, they would have been resistant, they would have run away, they wouldn't have gone on trains? Well, no. What do you mean you'll never know? Is it true, this and that and the other? And the judge gave him full leeway, and so he nailed him on that one. So you have a hand in cooperating with the Germans and keeping the information away, except from your family and the people you want to get on the train. But everybody else you didn't tell. So what does that make you? And he proved that Kastner had betrayed Chana Seneš. You all know that is, right? The famous heroine of Israel. Do we not have that? Yeah. Right? There's a famous Zionist hero. She parachuted in 1944 to try, with a couple others, to try to help the Jews over there. Kastner is the one that said, give yourself up to the Germans, and which she did. You see, you're going to make things worse over here. Here's somebody that we sent from Eretz Yisrael to try to do something, and you hand it over, And he said, well, I had a reason, but you see, little by little, his legal position in the court was cracking. And most damningly, in 1946, after the war was over, Kastner went to the war crimes trials and testified on behalf of Kurt Becher that he was a good guy and he got him off. Plus another guy, Krume, some of the big murderers over there. What'd you do that for? I didn't really do that. Here's the letter. Well, the Jewish agency told me to do it. Oh, really? That's even better. Let's get the Jewish, the Mapai is busted. Jewish agency has a guy come and say, oh no, we have nothing to do with that, and everybody's and as this got out into the press, it stunk to high heaven. And every day the lawyer is saying like this, and I'm going to uncover another layer of the sleaze and corruption that characterized the criminal regime that unfortunately is the head of the government of Israel and was playing a criminal role criminal negligence and in cooperation in the worst massacres in Jewish history, and now they got the nerve that they want to say they're the leaders of Israel and all the rest of it. By the way, Becher survived the war, obviously, didn't get into the camp, became a millionaire, and did a lot of business with Israel. Right? What a screwball war. Under the Shulami, under reparations stuff. Died in 81. Every week, the Olam Hazeh magazine gave this full screaming headlines, which led the general press to pick up the story. It was all in the Russian compound, in the big Beit Mishpat in Yerushalayim. Mapai is very powerful and entrenched. However, this image is now definitely tarnished, and many buy into the argument of the lawyer that you're dealing with an evil clique. The Jabotinsky myth, which is an alternative version of the past, what might have been, is now invigorated. Jabotinsky, unlike Ben-Gurion, everybody knows they say, love Yidden. You see? Ben-Gurion, these guys, they just wanted Israel and they didn't care about the Yidden. And Jabotinsky cared about each and every guy individually. If he were alive, things would have been different. There would have been a different reaction on the Shoah, and it would be a different new state of Israel. And the guys you have now in charge couldn't care less about that. Ben-Gurion said, all we care about is building the state. Moshe Sheret said, and Chaim Weizmann said, they're just human dust. All this kind of stuff is brought up in there in the course of the trial. Begin gets a political tchias hamesim as a result of this. That's exactly what happened. Once it started taking off, he said, he got out and started making speeches. And he said, it's all the part of the criminal groups. We in the Irgun, we started the illegal immigration, and Ben-Gurion suppressed it. This is true. In the late 30s, I told you before, right? We could have gotten more people in. It's all part of a pattern, and so forth. Meanwhile, Israel is going through a difficult period in terms of Arab terrorism. Public confidence is shaken. It's not a great time for the Mapai. This is 1954 and 55. The judge in the trial happens to be a Jabotinsky supporter. So the government made a big mistake in that. The judge spends 9 months reviewing the evidence and then releases his verdict a few weeks before the new elections. Right? The verdict was released in June. The elections were in July. Okay, guilty. Let's put it this way. He said, there are 5. He said, I don't know exactly what the libel count is. Reading all this confusing stuff, I boil it down to 5 charges. That the Grunwald said Kastner did this, he did this, this, and this. Viewing this with total dispassion. 4 he did. 1 is not proven. So pay him $1. You get it? He says to Grunwald, he said, you owe him $1, a lira. Okay? But the other 4, guilty as charged. Oh my goodness, a court. Political explosion, cultural explosion. This is the libel case that went wrong. I told you before. Kastner equals capo. The Jewish moral underside of the Shoah. I told you, this is Israel, where you see guys in the street that want to murder my mother. Begin goes into high form. The Mapai coddles the capos, And as a result, it was, and the government itself went into major panic. Now some people have dug up the old records of the meetings, and they said, "What are we going to do?" And we have to suppress this. And the Communist Party in Israel is already saying, "Why don't you have a law that says death penalty for people that helped Hitler? And Kastner should be the first one, to be killed." And so on and so forth. Israel was going crazy. As a result, in the elections of July, the Mapai takes its biggest hit. They went from 46 to 40. That's the worst they suffered. They still were ahead of others, and they went on to keep the government, but Sheret was out, and Ben-Gurion had to come back in. The Cheirut went from 8 to 15. So that was the Tchias HaMesim of Begin. As a result of that, he became a credible figure, and after that, he just went up. If he wouldn't screw up, he could have gotten 17, 18, 19, but the day before the election, he drove around in a Cadillac looking like Juan Perón, and this turned off, I mean it, and it turned off a lot of people over there. That's what they said at that time. So Israel's a crazy place, as you know. Kastner was ruined, but he's not a criminal. Think about what I said. He lost a libel case, but people are still waiting. What the government should now do is prosecute him for crimes. A court just confirmed that he did it wrong. No. My Mapai party says, this verdict was all wrong. We're going to appeal it to the Supreme Court. Oh yeah, why are you coddling him? I mean, if it's proven in court that he did wrong, why are you kissing up trying to prevent him? See, this proves that you're all part of the big plot to betray the Jewish people during the Holocaust. No, that's not what's happening over here. We feel it's a miscarriage of justice. Look how poisoned the visit to the Jewish past. And by the way, this is just a little It's just opening a little bit of what happened in the show I told you before. It's not necessarily a pretty picture. It's not all the Warsaw Ghetto. Right? A phenomenon like this brings out all kinds of issues. The government appeals the verdict. The Supreme Court takes 3 years. Okay? At the end of 3 years, well, before that happens, Kastner is bumped off. He's assassinated by Jews who say, kill the capo. Then the Supreme Court issues in 1957. Then the Supreme Court issues a verdict that quashes that the verdict was unfair. Nationally, everybody says like this, oh, sure, they're trying to cover up for Ben-Gurion. You see? And so you can't, it's a Mapai whitewash. That proves, right, the corruption of the government, the view of the corrupt government cover-up of a capo becomes widely known a few years later when Ben Hecht in America, who had been part of the Jabotinsky movement, writes it up in Perfidy. This is Perfidy, what I just told you. All he did was write the English version from the Israeli papers of the Kastner trial. And he totally buys into the story I just outlined to you. And therefore, he says, look how corrupt the Israeli establishment is. How does the Israeli establishment react? They ban the book. Oh, that makes it a bestseller, don't they? Right? Are you old enough to remember? I am. Are you old enough to remember before Begin came into office? If they caught you bringing that book into Israel, they confiscated you, get into trouble. Which, of course, made it a samizdat, underground bestseller. This yeshiva guy and that guy always floated around because if Israel wants to ban it, that proves it must be true. Otherwise, what would you care? So look how weird this is. The establishment and the children of Kastner vociferously deny his own guilt down to the present time. What I looked the other day, it's amazing. We live in the age of the internet, and so you don't have to have a big publishing company or you can do your one-man thing. And so Kastner's family are all over the internet with all kinds of YouTube things saying he was innocent. And what's really freaky, and I'll show you this, it takes about 2 minutes, I just found the other day, is his family put out a thing called Killing Kastner or something like that, in which, now listen to this, he was shot by 2 guys. And they were arrested and tried and convicted. But there's no death penalty in Israel, so they were sentenced to a prison thing, but it was clear that they did this as a sort of political crime, so to speak. They weren't murderers in the typical sense of hold up people or something like that. They did this as a one-time thing. So a couple years later, they got off. That's what happened. And so here you have a capo system in reverse. Here, Kastner's children walking around, knowing that this guy shot our father, and he doesn't deny it. And so what's amazing is somebody went on the internet and they put them together, maybe his own kids did, where you'll meet the guy who shot him. He says, yes, I shot him. And the daughter saying, why, or something to that effect. Here, take a look at this. As I say, this is a pro-Kastner piece, about 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes. He was a hero. This is the guy who shot him.
Clear, holy land from this atrocity.
He saved the most Jews in the whole world.
That's his daughter.
My father, he gets murdered over and over again.
He has been dealing with Eichmann. He has been going in and out of the Gestapo headquarters, dealing with secrets in the name of nobody.
shot in the back when he was trying to get away. He's the one.
They're all in one room. All right, that's enough. You can find it yourself if you're interested. Only nowadays with the internet and with the YouTubes and all this kind of stuff can they arrange these kinds of issues, which gives it surreal. Let me conclude by saying the Kastner affair jolted in Israel, whose population, certainly whose leadership, had sought to avoid discussing the whole thing by arguing that the establishment of Medinat Israel meant that the Jewish people had moved past the Holocaust. But the Kastner affair demonstrated that Israel and Israelis had not done so. In the following years, the Shoah